Governor Patrick's trying to make some long-awaited progress on bridge repairs along the Charles River, but advocates for open space along the river and many allies in the state legislature hope the opportunity can also be used for benefiting pedestrians and people on bikes. That means a change of plans and some additional money. Our guest will say why it's worth the price. We'd like to welcome the president of the Charles River Conservancy, Renata Tscharner. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris. Good to be here.
First of all, this is something that your organization has been looking at for about 5 years now. And of course, much longer than that, a lot of people have been riding bikes and taking walks along here. So why is this so important?
Well, it's very important that as people ride along the Charles River, which is one of the most beautiful off-road pathways in the region, that they can do it safely and that they can also do it without being interrupted by the traffic on the bridges, so they can go underneath in underpasses.
Certainly one thing I remember is hitting some parts of this bikeway along the river. You get to Western Avenue or River Street or Cambridge Street on this side, and you're waiting for the light. Maybe people bunch up and maybe the motorists are going to get nervous. Maybe there's a danger that they might hit somebody if the timing's off a little bit.
There's always the danger of that, and as the traffic across the river increases, with Harvard developing the Alston-Brighton campus, there's going to be more traffic. But it's also a way to encourage more people to use bikes to work, to travel to work, for recreation, so there's a public health component, and just a sustainable transportation issue to make it possible off-roads to bicycle.
So the way this works, maybe we can bring up an image of one of these bridges to illustrate, explain how this would work or how it would look if this plan would actually be followed.
Yeah, well, it would mean you leave the pathway along the Charles and then you go through the abutment of the bridge, and it could be designed in such a way that it goes with the architecture of these historic bridges, and the sides of the abutment could be done in a bioengineering fashion, so it doesn't look just like a naked concrete wall, but it would fit in with the character of the parklands.
Well, right now, of course, there are considerations about how much money this would take, yeah, and maybe how much additional time, too.
Absolutely. These are very serious concerns because it is an accelerated bridge program, and the governor and Secretary Mullen are very keen of getting the project done on time and on budget. We are fully aware of that. But on the other hand, it's a generation, 2 generations chance to do something. So we will be looking very carefully at what's the cost of moving water mains, what is the cost that it would, in terms of more time for permitting. But we also want to look at the cost, what are the long-term benefits in terms of gasoline save, because people will be using more bikes, in terms of attracting tourists. So there is that cost, and of course that is a cost that will be spread out over several generations.
Now, despite all the advantage of this, this is also a time when the T is really hard pressed to get money to fix up trains in the red and the orange line, and which I'm sure that affects quite a few people. So can you really spend money on something like this?
I think we can. I agree that the T is a high priority, and with the many riders, that obviously has some weight. But we want to find out if you do it now or do it later, what are the costs, what are the differences. And sometimes a good idea needs to be done when the opportunity occurs. And we have 29 organizations, including the BU Student Union, and that represents about 140,000 members and people these organizations reach, and 29 elected officials, from U.S. Representative Capuano to all the state elected officials along the river and in the region, as well as the Cambridge City Council and the Boston City Council.
Right, and again, this is not just something that college students do, because we're seeing other neighborhoods in Boston. There are people using bikes on Dorchester Avenue. So we're talking about some other constituencies here right now.
Yes. In its constituencies, obviously, Mass Bike, advocating for more bicycling, but also organizations that try to get kids to bike, because you need a safe off-road environment to start biking, to feel confident, so that eventually you can go and bicycle on the road and take it and become an active bicyclist in the city.
Now, you're also concerned about some of the work that's going to be going on around the Longfellow Bridge and at the Boston end. Of course, we're talking about at Charles Circle here. And it took me many decades of life in Boston before I realized that there there was a way you could get from someplace near Charles Station to the Esplanade without getting tangled up.
Well, that's right. There are no signs. But as part of the Longfellow Bridge, we hope that Mass DOT will also create a much improved bridge to the Esplanade, which will make it easier to get to the Esplanade, because these bridges are not just routes for transportation, and in the case of the Longfellow Bridge of the Red Line, but they're also the connectors to the parklands, and this is such an important resource for everybody in Boston. We need to be able to get to the parklands by foot and by bike, and just like with the pathways, there's a chance for tourism. I think the Longfellow Bridge, the sidewalks of the Longfellow Bridge can become a destination. Really wide, beautiful sidewalks will make a huge difference.
Now, until the repairs got underway, there were 2 lanes of traffic, vehicular traffic each way on the Longfellow Bridge. Would one of those have to be given up to get this additional pedestrian and bike access?
Mass DOT has not yet released of what they're submitting to the federal government. Obviously, the bicycle and pedestrian advocates would like to see a very wide sidewalk and bike path, and what is determining that is what called the crash barrier, because that's an element that cannot be moved later or only at very, very high expense. So it's important to put the crash barrier as far away from the railing as possible, and everything else can then be striped later, figured out later. But where this crash barrier is located, that really determines the quality of that bridge as an attraction for tourists, for bicyclists, and for pedestrians.
All right, thank you very much for being with us from the Charles River Conservancy, Renata von Tscharner. And we'll have more news after this message.